My hands were covered in flour when the 40-second call came through. I was kneading bread dough in a small kitchen in Wisconsin, 3 years and 900 miles removed from the life my daughter stole. At that exact moment, in Chicago, 200 guests watched federal agents walk into her grand reopening party. Vanessa built her empire on my grief. She never suspected that the ground she stood on was still mine. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Those 42 missed calls were just the beginning of the longest night of my life. Quick question before we start. If your own daughter weaponized your dead wife's memory to steal everything you built, would you answer her calls? Share your thoughts in the comments. Note: this is fictional storytelling, exploring real themes about family boundaries, elder abuse, and consequences. Now, let me explain how Martin Calloway ended up counting phone calls at 2:47 in the morning with bread dough drying on his fingers. The phone started vibrating at 11:14 that night. I did not reach for it. My hands were deep in dough, flour dusted across the wooden counter that Rosa had sanded smooth last summer. The screen lit up the ceiling in blue pulses. I counted each flash the way I used to count minutes on a roasting timer. Precise. Detached. Professional. Blake Harrison. My son-in-law's name glowed in the dark. I let it ring. Pushed the heels of my palms into the dough. Folded. Pressed. Turned. The rhythm of bread is ancient and honest. You cannot lie to dough. It knows the temperature of your hands, the hesitation in your wrists, the anger in your grip. That night, the dough knew everything. Outside my window, Lake Michigan exhaled against the Door County shoreline. Inside, my phone performed its frantic dance across the flour-dusted counter. 5, 6, 7, 8. Blake's voicemail started arriving. I did not listen. I knew what his voice would sound like. The same practiced smoothness he had used to convince me to sign away my restaurants. Blake Harrison had never loved my food. He had counted it. My wife Diane had figured that out before I did. But that part comes later. At 2:47 in the morning, the name changed. Vanessa Harrison, my daughter. I stopped kneading. Flour hung in the air between my hands like something frozen. 9, 10, 11. She called without stopping. Each ring lasted 23 seconds before voicemail caught it. I knew because I counted. 23 seconds of my daughter's name illuminating the darkness. Then silence. Then 23 seconds again. Text messages arrived between calls. Dad, please answer. Blake has been arrested. They took everything. Please, Dad, I need you. I read each message with flour-covered fingers, leaving white smudges across the screen. Then I return to my dough. Fold. Press. Turn. 15. 16. 17. There was a time when Vanessa's name would have sent me running. When being her father meant being available at any cost, any hour, for any reason. That was 3 years ago, before the grief counselor, who was not a grief counselor. Before the retreat that was not a retreat. Before I learned my own daughter had turned my dead wife's memory into a tool for theft. 21. 22. 23. More texts. The restaurants are closed. The health inspector came. Dad, there are cameras everywhere. I shaped the dough into a round loaf, scored the top with 3 quick slashes, and set it in the oven. 375 degrees. 45 minutes. Some things cannot be rushed. 27. 28. Another text. They say, Mom set this up. They say she knew. What did Mom know, Dad? I closed my eyes. Diane. 3 years after losing everything and rebuilding from a chef's knife and $940, her name still hit me like the smell of something burning. Sharp. Immediate. Impossible to ignore. Yes, Diane had known. She had seen what I had been too grief-blind to notice. And she had done what any great chef does when they see disaster coming. She prepared. Quietly. Precisely. with the kind of love that does not announce itself but simply shows up when you need it most. 32, 33, 34. The oven hummed. The bread was rising, its surface cracking along the score lines. I thought about the last 3 years. Emerald Meadows, and its lavender-scented prison. Rosa Gutierrez showing up at a farmer's market with a cast-iron skillet, and the words that saved my life. Tom Wynn's grandmother's faux recipe, and a baby girl named Diane. A letter from my dead wife that rewrote everything I thought I knew. 38. 39. 40. I pulled the bread from the oven. Golden crust. Perfect crumb. I set it on the cooling rack and listened to the crust crackle as it contracted. The best sound in baking. The sound of something finished. 41. Then came the 40-second call. I picked up the phone. Not to answer. Just to hold it. Feel the vibration against my flour-covered palm. Watch my daughter's name pulse one final time. The vibration stopped. Voicemail. I pressed play. There were no words. No begging. No explanations. Instead, I heard something that froze me where I stood. A pan placed on a burner. The soft hiss of butter melting. A knife against a cutting board. Onions. Celery. Carrots. The holy trinity of my wife's kitchen. Vanessa was cooking. Through the phone, across 900 miles, I heard my daughter making chicken pot pie. Diane's recipe. The one she cooked every Sunday. The one I taught Vanessa when she was 9, standing on a step stool, small hands wrapped around a wooden spoon. The chopping stopped. A sob. Then stirring resumed. Chop and cry. Stir and cry. Cook and cry. The voicemail ran 3 minutes. Not one word. Just my daughter standing in the ruins of everything she built on lies, cooking her dead mother's recipe, and weeping. I stood in my kitchen, bread cooling on the counter, flour on my hands, and listened to my daughter try to find her way home through the only language our family ever truly spoke. But before you understand why I counted calls instead of answering, before you understand those 42 rings that divided my old life from my new one, you need to understand what happens when someone turns your grief into a weapon. You need to understand the day my daughter hired a woman to convince me I was broken, shipped me to a place designed to keep me quiet, and gutted every restaurant I ever built while I disappeared. You need to understand how Martin Calloway lost his wife for the second time. 3 years earlier, on a bright October morning in 2021, the smell of garlic hitting olive oil told me everything was still right with the world. That sizzle, that first golden fragrance rising from a hot pan, had been my morning prayer for 35 years. Other men woke to alarm clocks. I woke to mise en place. Calloway's River North opened at 11:30 every morning. But I arrived at 6. Always 6. The kitchen was mine in those pre-dawn hours. Just me and the burners and the quiet hum of refrigeration units holding everything at perfect temperature. I would tie my apron, sharpen my knives, and begin the prep work that most head chefs left to their sous. But I had never trusted anyone else with the foundations, stocks, sauces, doughs, the things that hold a meal together. You build those yourself, or you build on sand. That October morning, I stood at my station in the River North kitchen and broke down a whole chicken with the kind of speed that only comes from doing the same thing 10,000 times. Knife through the joint. Clean separation. No wasted motion. My hands knew the geometry of a chicken the way a pianist knows scales. Automatic. Musical. Alive. I had built 3 restaurants in Chicago. River North was the flagship. 1 Michelin star, the one critics wrote about. West Loop was the neighborhood place. Comfort food elevated. The kind of restaurant where regulars had their own tables and servers knew their orders by heart. Lincoln Park was the newest, farm-to-table, seasonal menus that changed with what the Wisconsin farmers brought to market each week. 35 years. 212 employees across 3 locations. Annual revenue just north of $4 million. a reputation built on the simple belief that food should taste like someone gave a damn. And Diane. Always Diane. She had been the front of house at River North from the day we opened. The smile to my fire, I used to say. I cooked with intensity, sometimes with anger, always with precision. Diane moved through the dining room like water, smooth, calming, finding every crack in the service and filling it before anyone noticed. Customers came for my food. They came back for her warmth. She died on a Tuesday night in March of 2019. Rain on Lakeshore Drive, the kind of Chicago rain that turns the road into a black mirror. We had argued that evening about retiring. She wanted me to slow down. I told her the restaurants needed me. She said the restaurants would survive without me. I said she was wrong. She grabbed her keys and walked out. I let her go. I stood in our kitchen on Lincoln Park and listened to the door close, and I did not follow her because I was angry and proud and certain that I was right about the restaurants needing me more than anything else. The phone rang 47 minutes later. Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Your wife has been in an accident, Mr. Calloway. You should come now. Diane died at 11:18 that night. I was holding her hand. The monitors went flat, and the room filled with a silence so complete, it had texture. Like flour settling after you slam dough on a counter. Everything suspended. Everything still. I never forgave myself for that argument. For letting her walk into the rain. For choosing the restaurants over one more conversation, one more chance to say I was wrong and she was right and nothing mattered more than her. That guilt became the heaviest ingredient I carried. Stirred into everything I cooked. And every decision I made for the next 2 years. The chicken pot pie stopped after she died. Diane made it every Sunday without fail. Her mother's recipe, handwritten on an index card, stained with butter and thyme. After she was gone, I could not look at that recipe without hearing the rain on Lakeshore Drive. So I sealed it away with her things and I cooked everything else instead, trying to fill the silence she left behind with the noise of a busy kitchen. By October 2021, the grief had become something I wore like a second skin. I functioned. I cooked. I ran 3 restaurants. But the joy had leaked out of everything, replaced by a mechanical precision that my staff respected but no one enjoyed. I was a machine that produced excellent food, and machines do not need comfort or rest or the sound of someone laughing in the next room. That is when Vanessa and Blake appeared with their plan. They came to dinner at River North on a Friday evening. Vanessa looked beautiful, in a navy blazer that reminded me so much of Diane that my chest ached. She had her mother's cheekbones, her mother's way of tilting her head when she listened, but her eyes were different. Sharper. More calculating. I had not noticed that yet. Blake Harrison sat beside her, adjusting his cufflinks with practiced smoothness. 38 years old. Former financial manager at a firm I later learned had fired him for falsifying accounts. He had the kind of smile that covered a room like varnish, shiny and hard and impossible to see through. Dad, this is incredible, Vanessa said, gesturing at the tasting menu I had prepared. You built something amazing. I felt pride rise in my chest. The old pride. The kind that comes from watching your child recognize your work. Your mother would be proud, I said. Blake leaned forward. Martin, we have been reviewing the business structure. There is real potential here. Expansion. Modernization. We could take Calloway's national. He spoke about growth projections and brand development and market positioning. Words I understood, but had never cared about. I cared about whether the sauce broke, whether the bread rose, whether the customer at table 9 smiled when the first bite hit their tongue. Blake cared about numbers. He always cared about numbers. But I watched him during dinner and noticed something I would not understand until much later. Blake tasted every dish, lifted his fork, touched it to his lips, chewed once, set the fork down. He never finished a single plate. He never closed his eyes the way people do when food moves them. He experienced my cooking the way an accountant experiences a receipt, recording it, categorizing it, assigning it. Value. He did not eat my food. He audited it. Diane would have seen it immediately. She had a radar for people who performed appreciation instead of feeling it. But Diane was gone, and I was too tired and too sad to see anything clearly. We signed the transition papers the following Tuesday. I became Senior Culinary Advisor, a title that let me keep my apron, but surrendered everything else. Vanessa and Blake would handle operations, finances, expansion. I would cook. That afternoon I stood in the River North kitchen after everyone had left. The burners were off. The steel counters gleamed under the cleaning crew's work. I ran my hand along the prep station where I had broken down 10,000 chickens, where Diane used to sit on a stool and steal bites of whatever I was testing, where my daughter had taken her first steps across a kitchen floor, dusted with flour. My hand trembled on the cold steel. Not from age. Not from illness. From the knowledge that I had just handed my life's work to people I loved, trusting that love would be enough to keep it safe. It was not. The first month was a masterclass in misdirection. Looking back, I can see it clearly. The way a chef sees every flaw in a dish after it has already been served. But in November 2021, I saw nothing except what they wanted me to see. Blake and Vanessa consulted me on everything. Menu changes, staffing decisions, vendor negotiations. Blake would call at 7 in the morning and ask my opinion on wine suppliers. Vanessa would stop by River North with lunch and sit across from me the way Diane used to, stealing fries off my plate and laughing about the customers. It felt like family. It felt like maybe I had not lost everything when Diane died. Maybe I had simply handed the weight to younger shoulders so mine could finally rest. Then December came, and the temperature dropped in more ways than one. It started with small things. A lock code changed at West Loop that no one told me about. A new sous chef hired at Lincoln Park without my input. My weekly meeting with the kitchen managers quietly removed from the calendar. When I showed up at River North one Monday morning at 6, my usual hour, the alarm code did not work. I stood outside my own restaurant in the Chicago cold, breath fogging. Fingers numb, pressing numbers that no longer opened the door. Blake apologized profusely. "System update, Martin. Must have slipped through the cracks. I will get you the new code today." He did not get me the new code for 3 days. "Dad, you should be resting," Vanessa said when I mentioned it over the phone. "You do not need to be at the restaurant at 6 in the morning anymore. That is the whole point of stepping back." Stepping back. The phrase tasted like unseasoned broth. Thin. Lacking substance. Missing the essential thing that makes it worth consuming. By mid-December, I was visiting the restaurants twice a week instead of daily. By January, once a week. My apron hung on its hook at River North, untouched. The kitchen I had built over 35 years was running without me, and the strange thing was, it ran fine. The food was good. Not extraordinary, but good. The kind of good that keeps the lights on, but does not win anyone's heart. I spent my evenings in the Lincoln Park house, sitting in the kitchen that Diane and I had renovated together 12 years ago. White subway tiles she picked. Cast iron pot rack I installed. The step stool where Vanessa learned to make chicken pot pie at 9 years old, still tucked in the corner. I would sit at the counter in the dark and listen to the silence and feel my life contracting around me like a fist closing. That is when Vanessa called about the grief counselor. "Dad, Blake found someone incredible. A therapist who specializes in complicated grief. She has helped so many people. I really think you should talk to her." I did not want a therapist. I wanted my kitchen back. I wanted the alarm code. I wanted to stand at my station at 6 in the morning and break down chickens and feel the muscle memory of 35 years flow through my hands. But Vanessa's voice carried that particular tone, soft and insistent, and laced with just enough worry to make refusal feel selfish. Her mother's trick. Diane had used it to get me to take vacations. Vanessa was using it to get me to open my door to a stranger. Nicole Torres arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late December. She rang the doorbell at exactly 2 o'clock. I opened the door and was hit immediately by two things. The smell of jasmine perfume, heavy and sweet, and nothing like Diane's clean soap and water scent. And her smile, wide, warm, practiced, the kind of smile that has been tested in mirrors until it achieves maximum trustworthiness. Martin, it is so wonderful to meet you. Vanessa has told me so much about you. She was around 40. Dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, dressed in soft earth tones that said approachable and professional. She carried a leather notebook and spoke in a voice like warm honey poured over gravel, smooth with just enough texture to feel authentic. I led her to the living room. She paused in the doorway, scanning the space with a quick efficiency I mistook for admiration. Later I would realize she was cataloging the art on the walls, the furniture, the size of the rooms. She was pricing my life the way Blake priced my food. She chose the armchair by the window. Diane's chair. The one where my wife had spent every Sunday morning, reading the Tribune with her legs tucked underneath her and a cup of coffee balanced on the armrest. The chair I had not sat in since March 2019 because sitting in it felt like trespassing on sacred ground. Nicole Torres sat in that chair like she owned it. I said nothing. Maybe I should have. Maybe that was the first moment I should have understood that something was wrong. But grief makes you polite in terrible ways. You become so accustomed to people entering your spaces with good intentions that you stop questioning whether the intentions are actually good. Tell me about Diane, Nicole said, opening her notebook. So I told her. About the restaurants, about our partnership, about the way she could read a dining room the way I could read a pan. About the argument, about the rain, about holding her hand while the monitors went flat. Nicole listened without interrupting. Her pen moved across the page in small, precise strokes. When I finished, the room was quiet except for the tick of the hallway clock and the distant rumble of the L train passing 2 blocks away. Martin, she said, leaning forward just enough to create intimacy without invasion. Have you ever considered that your grief might be affecting your ability to make clear decisions? That carrying this guilt for 2 years has compromised your capacity to function independently? The words sounded clinical, professional, reasonable. I did not hear what they actually were. A diagnosis designed to serve as a weapon. Nicole Torres was not asking me to explore my grief. She was building a case that I was incompetent. Every word I spoke, every tear I shed, every memory I shared was being transcribed in that leather notebook and delivered to Blake Harrison by the end of each session. She was not a grief counselor. She was a grief architect. And she was designing my collapse, one Thursday at a time. I did not know any of this in December 2021. I only knew that for the first time since Diane died, someone was listening. Someone sat in my living room and let me talk without checking their watch or changing the subject or telling me that time heals everything. I trusted her. The way you trust the flame under a pot. You assume it will cook your food, not burn your house down. That assumption would cost me everything. Nicole changed tactics in the 4th week. The listening stopped. The questions turned into statements. The notebook closed and her hands folded in her lap the way a judge folds their hands before delivering a sentence. Martin, I need to be honest with you. She leaned forward in Diane's chair, and the jasmine perfume reached me like a warning I was too numb to read. You are not making progress. Your attachment to the restaurants, to the kitchen, to cooking itself. These are not healthy coping mechanisms. They are anchors. They are dragging you under. I sat across from her, my hands resting on my knees. Hands that had broken down 10,000 chickens. Hands that had plated food for governors and celebrities and first dates and last suppers. Hands that had held Diane's fingers while the monitors went flat. Those hands had not touched a stove in 9 days. The kitchen is all I have left, I said. That is exactly the problem. Nicole's voice carried the gentle firmness of someone delivering a truth too important to soften. You have collapsed your entire identity into one activity. When you lose access to that activity, and you will, Because age and grief are taking their toll, you will have nothing left. You need to release the kitchen before it destroys you. Release the kitchen. The phrase made no sense. It was like telling a fish to release the water. Cooking was not something I did. It was something I was. Take the knife out of a chef's hand, and you do not have a retired chef. You have a man who has forgotten his own language. But Nicole had a way of making surrender sound like wisdom. She reframed every loss as liberation. Every piece of myself I gave up became a burden lifted. She spoke in metaphors that sounded like therapy, but functioned like demolition. You are not losing your kitchen, Martin. You are gaining freedom from the thing that keeps you trapped in your grief. By the 6th week, I stopped cooking entirely. The kitchen at Lincoln Park went dark. The gas burners sat cold. The cast iron skillets Diane had seasoned over 20 years developed a thin film of dust. I opened the refrigerator one morning and found only takeout containers and a carton of milk 3 days past its date. The man who had fed thousands could not feed himself. Rosa Gutierrez called twice during this period. Rosa had been my sous chef at West Loop for 4 years, the best number 2 I ever had. Quick hands, fearless palate, instincts that could not be taught. I had fired her in 2017 after catching her drinking vodka behind the walk-in cooler during a Saturday dinner rush. She was going through a divorce. I did not ask why she was drinking. I just fired her. One of the things I would later need to make right. Both times Rosa called. Blake answered my phone. Mr. Calloway is not available right now. He is focusing on his health. We appreciate your concern. Rosa told me later that something in Blake's voice made her skin crawl, but she had no standing to push further. She was just a fired sous chef calling her old boss. Nicole came 3 times a week now. Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays. Each session peeled another layer away. She asked about my finances, about the house, about the insurance policies, about Diane's estate. Questions that felt like concern but were actually reconnaissance. Have you considered simplifying your financial life, Martin? All these properties, all these accounts. It must be so overwhelming for someone in your state. My state. She said it casually, the way you mentioned the weather. But the word carried weight. My state implied a condition, a diagnosis, a verdict. I was no longer Martin Calloway, chef. I was Martin Calloway, patient, a man in a state. In the 8th week, Blake arrived on a Saturday morning with a manila folder. Vanessa stood behind him in the hallway, arms crossed, face arranged in an expression of loving worry that I now recognize as rehearsed. Dad, we need to streamline things. Blake says there are tax advantages to consolidating the restaurant assets. Blake spread the papers across the kitchen counter. The counter where I used to prep vegetables at 5 in the morning. Now it held legal documents instead of cutting boards. Transfer of business assets. Consolidated management authority. Liability restructuring. This will protect everything you built, Blake said. Simplify the management structure so we can focus on growth. You will still own it all, Martin. We are just making it easier to manage. I looked at the papers. Then at Vanessa. Then at my hands. They were clean. No flour under the nails. No calluses from knife handles. No burn marks from reaching across a hot grill. For the first time in 35 years, my hands looked like they belonged to someone who had never cooked a meal in his life. Nicole says this is part of the letting go process. Vanessa added softly. Releasing the administrative burdens so you can focus on healing. I signed. Every page. My hand moved across the signature line with the mechanical obedience of a man who has been told so many times that he is broken that he has begun to believe it. I signed away operational control of 3 restaurants, 2 commercial accounts, and the business insurance policies, all to a management entity Blake had created called Harrison Calloway Group. That evening, after they left, I stood at the kitchen window, watching the December snow fall on Lincoln Park. The streetlights turned each flake orange. The sidewalks were empty. The house was silent in the particular way a house goes silent when someone has been slowly emptied out of it. Movement in the driveway caught my eye. Blake and Nicole standing beside Blake's car. She was handing him the leather notebook. He was scrolling through his phone, showing her something on the screen. Then Nicole laughed and touched Blake's arm. Not a professional touch. Not a handshake or a pat of encouragement. Her fingers lingered on his forearm, and she leaned close and said something that made him smile. Through the window glass, through the falling snow. I watched my grief counselor touch my son-in-law with the easy familiarity of someone who had touched him many times before. The moment lasted 3 seconds. Then Blake opened his car door, and Nicole walked to her own vehicle, and they drove away in opposite directions as if nothing had happened. I stood at the window for a long time. The snow kept falling. My hands, those clean and empty hands, pressed flat against the cold glass. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong for weeks, but I was too hollowed out, too convinced of my own brokenness, to assemble the pieces into a picture I could act on. 3 days later, Vanessa arrived with a glossy brochure. The cover showed rolling green hills, a white farmhouse, a woman in yoga clothes smiling at a sunrise. Emerald Meadows Wellness Center. Digital detox. Spiritual renewal. A place to rediscover yourself. Dad. This is exactly what you need. A few months away from everything. No stress. No decisions. No reminders of what you have lost. Just peace. And healing. And space to breathe. I turned the brochure over in my hands. The paper was heavy and expensive. The photographs showed gardens, meditation rooms, communal meals served at long wooden tables. Everything looked warm and gentle and safe. What the brochure did not show was the gate that locked from the outside. The phones collected on arrival. The mail screened by staff. The food deliberately stripped of flavor, seasoning, and soul. The careful, clinical erasure of everything that makes a person feel like themselves. They called it healing. I would learn to call it something else entirely. Emerald Meadows smelled of lavender oil and control. The scent hit me the moment Blake Harrison opened the car door on a gray February morning in 2022. I stood in the gravel driveway, my single suitcase at my feet, and stared at a converted farmhouse that looked like it had been designed by someone who had never lived in one. White, clapboard walls, Foresta green shutters, a wrap-around porch with rocking chairs arranged at perfect intervals, each one facing the same direction, as though the residents were expected to watch the same horizon and think the same thoughts. Dr. Lauren Simmons met us on the porch. She was perhaps 50, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a low bun and a cream cashmere sweater that probably cost more than a week's groceries. Her handshake was warm and practiced. She called the program a wellness journey, and I noticed she never once used the word patient. We were guests. The locked gate behind us was a privacy feature. The confiscation of personal devices was a digital reset. They took my phone during intake. A young staff member in khaki scrubs placed it into a cloth drawstring bag, wrote my name on a tag, and carried it away like evidence. That phone held 3 voicemails from Diane. Her voice telling me to pick up bread. Her voice laughing about a broken dishwasher. Her voice, 2 days before the accident, saying she loved me and to not forget the dry cleaning. I watched the bag disappear through a door, marked staff only, and felt something inside me go with it. Vanessa squeezed my hand. It's only temporary, Dad. You'll get it back when you're better. She said the word better, the way someone describes a car after an oil change. Routine. Mechanical. She signed 3 forms, kissed my cheek, and was gone within the hour. My room was on the 2nd floor. A single bed with white linens. A nightstand with a lavender sachet on the pillow. One window facing a garden that was more dirt than green in February. No television. No radio. No telephone. No clock either. Which I would later understand was deliberate. When you cannot track time, You lose the rhythm of your own life. And rhythm was the one thing a chef could never afford to lose. The schedule arrived on a laminated card slipped under my door at 6 the next morning. Breakfast at 7:30. Group meditation at 9. Individual counseling at 11. Lunch at 12:30. Wellness workshop at 2. Guided garden walk at 4. Dinner at 5:30. Reflection, journaling at 7. Lights out at 9. Every hour was assigned, every transition supervised, every conversation observed by a staff member who smiled too much and wrote too many notes. But it was the food that told me the truth about Emerald Meadows. Breakfast was instant oatmeal the color of wet cement, served in a white bowl with a single packet of brown sugar. Lunch was a sandwich on white bread, so soft it collapsed under the weight of plastic-tasting turkey and a slice of cheese that could have been any cheese or no cheese at all. Dinner was the worst. Boiled chicken breast, overcooked rice, and steamed vegetables that had surrendered every trace of color and texture long before they reached the plate. I had spent 35 years building flavors that made strangers close their eyes and remember their mother's kitchens. This food said one thing clearly: you do not matter. I asked Dr. Simmons if I could help in the kitchen. She tilted her head the way Nicole Torres used to and said, "Martin, your therapeutic plan specifically identifies cooking as a trauma response behavior. We need to explore who you are without the apron." She smiled. I heard the lock click. On the 4th day, I met Edith Langford during the afternoon garden walk. She was 78, a retired literature professor from Milwaukee whose son had placed her at Emerald Meadows after she refused to sell her lakefront property. Her white hair was cropped short, and her eyes were the kind of sharp that age only polishes. She walked beside me along the frozen garden path and said, without looking at me, "They take your verbs first. Cooking, driving, deciding. Once you have no verbs left, you are only a noun. And nouns are easy to move." I thought about that sentence for 3 days straight. Vanessa visited on a Saturday. She brought photos of the restaurants on her phone, swiping through images of a redesigned River North dining room I did not recognize. New light fixtures, new table arrangements, a new sign that read, "Calloway's by Harrison" in brushed gold. She mentioned, almost as an aside, that Rosa Gutierrez had been let go. Blake felt the kitchen needed a fresh perspective, she said. She checked her phone 3 times during the 45-minute visit. She did not ask what I had eaten. She did not ask if I was sleeping. She said, "You look rested," the way someone compliments a painting they intend to sell. That night, after the hallway lights dimmed at 9:15, I slid out of bed and walked barefoot down the back staircase to the kitchen. The commercial-grade space was stainless steel and fluorescent light, stocked entirely with frozen vacuum-sealed meal packets, canned vegetables, and powdered seasoning. No fresh herbs, no garlic, no butter, no olive oil. Not a single onion. I stood in the blue-white glow of the walk-in cooler, surrounded by shelves of plastic-wrapped protein and pre-portioned starches, and I cried. Not for the restaurants. Not for the money. I cried because a kitchen without garlic is not a kitchen. It is a cell, and I was becoming exactly what they needed me to become. Nothing. 3 weeks into Emerald Meadows, I stopped counting days and started counting meals. 47 trays of beige food. 47 reminders that the person I used to be was being erased, one flavorless plate at a time. Dr. Simmons increased my sessions to twice daily, morning and afternoon, each one circling the same questions about attachment to former identity and unhealthy coping mechanisms rooted in labor. She never said the word cooking. She said compulsive occupational behavior, as though feeding people was a disease. Edith Langford became my anchor. We walked the garden path every afternoon at 4, our breath visible in the lady February air, and she taught me to speak in code. If staff was nearby, we discussed the weather or the dormant rose bushes. When they drifted out of earshot, Edith spoke in short, precise sentences that landed like nails. My son visits every 2 weeks. Each time, he brings papers. Each time, the papers give him more. She looked at me sideways. Has your daughter brought papers yet? She had. The previous Saturday, Vanessa arrived with a manila envelope and a pen. A power of attorney amendment, she explained. Just a small update to ensure the restaurants could operate smoothly while I focused on healing. I signed it at the visiting room table, while a staff member pretended to water a plastic plant 3 feet away. Vanessa tucked the envelope into her bag before I could read the second page. Edith nodded slowly when I told her. They season the trap with love, she said. That is why it works. By the 4th week, my hands had changed. I noticed it during a journaling session, holding the cheap ballpoint pen the facility provided. My fingertips were smooth. The calluses I had built over 35 years of gripping cast iron handles, sliding sheet pans from 600-degree ovens, and chopping through 10,000 onions were fading. A chef's hands are a resume. Mine was going blank. On the first Monday of March, Dr. Simmons called me into her office for what she described as a progress review. The room smelled of diffused eucalyptus and new furniture. She sat behind a glass desk with a single folder open in front of her. Martin, I want to share something positive. Your daughter and son-in-law have arranged for an extended stay. 3 additional months. They believe, and I agree, that your recovery requires a longer timeline. 3 additional months. The words settled into my stomach like cold grease. I asked if I had a choice. Dr. Simmons folded her hands. Of course you do, Martin, but leaving against medical advice would be documented, and that documentation could affect future legal considerations regarding your competency. She paused just long enough for the threat to finish cooking. We all want what is best for you. I walked back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. Through the window, the garden was still frozen. I could see the rocking chairs on the porch below, all still facing the same direction. I thought about Edith's words. Nouns are easy to move. I was becoming furniture. The next morning, a Tuesday, the front desk informed me I had a visitor. I assumed Vanessa. I walked to the visiting room and found Rosa Gutierrez sitting at the corner table with a paper bag in her lap. She looked different. Thinner. Her dark hair was pulled back tight, and she wore a coat I did not recognize. Something from a thrift store. The collar slightly frayed, but her eyes were the same. Direct. Unafraid. The eyes of a woman who had survived a kitchen line during Saturday dinner rush for 11 years and never once sent back a plate. Chef, she said. That single word broke something open in my chest. Rosa had driven 4 hours from Chicago after learning my location from a supply vendor who still delivered to Emerald Meadows. She spoke quickly, aware that visiting hours were monitored. Blake had fired her in January, 2 weeks after I entered the facility, citing restructuring. She had tried calling me 14 times. Every call was answered by a staff member who said I was unavailable and focusing on recovery. She tried reaching Vanessa directly. Blake intercepted each attempt. I brought you something, she said, and opened the paper bag. Inside was a small glass jar wrapped in a kitchen towel. She unscrewed the lid under the table, below the sightline of the staff member near the door. The smell hit me instantly. Roasted garlic, 12 cloves, slowly roasted in olive oil until they turned the color of dark honey. The scent rose between us like a conversation in a language only we understood. My eyes burned. I pressed my fingers against the warm glass and felt the heat move through my skin, through the fading calluses, through the tendons and bones that had shaped 100,000 meals. You are still a chef, Rosa said quietly. They can take the kitchen. They cannot take this. I held the jar for perhaps 30 seconds before the staff member approached and asked what we were eating. Rosa smiled and said it was homemade face cream, a family recipe for dry winter skin. The young woman in khaki scrubs glanced at the jar, wrinkled her nose at the smell, and walked away. Rosa leaned forward. Something is wrong, chef. The restaurants are changing. The menus are different. Blake hired a consulting firm. They are turning Calloway's into a franchise model. Fast casual, Your name on a paper bag. She paused. And there are money problems. I heard things before they pushed me out. Large transfers. New accounts. Vanessa's name. On everything. My daughter was not expanding my legacy. She was liquidating it. Rosa left after 40 minutes. At the door, she turned and said, I will come back. Every week. And I will bring you garlic. Every time. She said it the way a soldier makes a promise before a long march. Absolute. Unbreakable. That night, I hid the jar beneath my mattress. After lights out, I unscrewed the lid and breathed in, letting the scent fill the small white room. Roasted garlic in olive oil. The smell of every good thing I had ever made. The smell of Diane's kitchen on a Sunday afternoon. The smell of who I was before they tried to make me nothing. I was not nothing. Not yet. Rosa kept her promise. She came every Tuesday at 10 in the morning, signed the visitor log as Rosa M. Gutierrez, family friend, and sat at the same corner table with the same paper bag in her lap. The staff learned her face. They stopped checking the bag after the second visit, which was exactly what she wanted. The first week she brought roasted garlic. The second week, a small jar of chimichurri, so green it looked like it was still alive. The third week, a fold of wax paper holding 4 slices of sourdough bread she had baked herself, the crust dark and crackled, the crumb open and sour, in the way that only a 3-day ferment can achieve. I held a slice under my nose and closed my eyes, and for 10 seconds I was standing in the River North kitchen on a Saturday morning, pulling loaves from the deck oven, while Diane counted reservations at the host stand. Each visit lasted exactly 40 minutes. Rosa timed it on her watch, because the facility's visiting policy allowed 45, and she wanted the last 5 minutes as a buffer in case a staff member lingered. She spoke in the same low, direct tone she had used on the line during a Friday night rush. No wasted words. No wasted motion. She told me what was happening outside. Blake had dissolved the original Calloway's LLC in late January and reformed it under Harrison Calloway Group, a new entity in which my name appeared nowhere in the operating agreement. The River North location had been stripped of its white tablecloths and replaced with counter service. The West Loop restaurant was now a ghost kitchen, producing delivery-only meals under 6 different brand names, none of them mine. Lincoln Park, the first restaurant Diane and I had opened 28 years ago, was scheduled for demolition in April to make way for a mixed-use development. Blake had signed the sale agreement. The buyer was a real estate firm linked to Blake's college roommate. They are not running your restaurants, chef, Rosa said during her 4th visit. They are stripping them for parts. She also brought news of Nicole Torres. Rosa had run into a former hostess from West Loop who mentioned that Nicole had been seen leaving Blake's apartment building on 3 separate evenings in February. Not Vanessa's apartment. Blake's. The affair was not even hidden well. It existed in plain sight because the only person who might have cared was locked inside a lavender-scented room in rural Wisconsin, eating boiled chicken and journaling about his feelings. I asked Rosa how she was surviving. She looked away for the first time since I had known her. After Blake fired her, no restaurant in Chicago would return her calls. Blake had made phone calls of his own, she said, telling hiring managers that Rosa had been terminated for inventory discrepancies. A polite way of calling someone a thief. She was working 3 part-time jobs, mornings at a bakery in Pilsen, afternoons cleaning offices downtown, weekends catering small parties out of her apartment kitchen, $50 trays of tamales and enchiladas that her mother's recipes had made famous in their neighborhood long before Rosa ever stepped into my kitchen. "I'm fine, chef," she said, in the voice of someone who was not fine, but had decided that fine was the only option available. On the 5th Tuesday, Rosa brought something different. She reached into the paper bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, handwritten in blue ink. It was a recipe. Her mother's recipe for mole poblano, 27 ingredients, 3 days of preparation, and a final instruction that read, "Stir with patience. The chocolate knows when it is ready." "My mother gave this to me when I turned 15, Rosa said. She told me a recipe is not instructions. It is a person talking to you from another time. She placed the paper on the table between us. I am giving it to you because you need to hear someone's voice right now. And because you gave me my first real kitchen 11 years ago. Even though I barely spoke English and burned the hollandaise twice on my first day, I remembered that day. Rosa, 23 years old, standing at the sauce station with tears running down her face and a split hollandaise in the pan. I walked over, dumped the broken sauce, set a fresh pan on the burner, and said, again. She made it 4 more times that night. The 5th attempt was perfect. I did not compliment her. I simply moved on to the next ticket. In a professional kitchen, silence is the highest praise. I folded the recipe and tucked it inside my pillowcase that night, next to the jar of chimichurri. My contraband was growing. Garlic, bread, herbs, a handwritten mole recipe. The tiny arsenal of a man planning a war that no one at Emerald Meadows could see coming. Rosa's 6th visit fell on the 2nd Tuesday of April. The garden outside had begun to thaw, and I could see the first pale shoots of something green pushing through the mud near the walking path. She sat down, opened the bag, and placed a small Nokia phone on the table. Prepaid. Untraceable. Loaded with 60 minutes of call time. Edith told me about the back staircase, Rosa said. She told me the staff checks rooms at 9:15 and does not check again until 6. That gives you 8 hours and 45 minutes. I looked at the phone. Then I looked at Rosa. Her jaw was set. Her hands were flat on the table, palms down, the way she used to steady herself before plating the final course of a 12-top tasting menu. Chef, she said. It is time to leave. The word leave landed in my chest like the first crack of heat in a cold cast-iron pan. Sudden. Sharp. Full of promise and danger in equal measure. I had not walked beyond the facility's garden fence in 7 weeks. I had not driven a car. I had not made a single decision that was not approved, scheduled, or supervised. The idea of leaving was enormous. It filled the room. I wrapped my fingers around the phone. It was warm from Rosa's coat pocket. I thought of Diane. I thought of her voice on those 3 voicemails I had not heard in 7 weeks. I thought of Lincoln Park, the first kitchen, the place where everything began, scheduled for demolition in days. I thought of Edith's words. They take your verbs first. It was time to take them back. I left Emerald Meadows at 1:47 inches the morning on a Wednesday in mid-April, carrying everything I owned in a plastic grocery bag. The back staircase was exactly where Edith described it, past the supply closet on the 2nd floor, through a fire door that had been propped open with a folded cardboard box since January because the maintenance staff used it to smoke. The door opened onto a concrete landing, then 12 steps down to a gravel path that ran along the north side of the building toward the service entrance. No cameras on that side. Edith had counted them. I wore 2 layers of clothing, the warmest combination I could assemble from the thin garments they allowed. Gray sweatpants, a white undershirt, a navy blue hoodie that a previous resident had left in the communal laundry. Socks doubled. My only pair of shoes. The same leather loafers I had worn the day Vanessa drove me here, now loose on my feet because I had lost 14 pounds on 7 weeks of boiled chicken and instant oatmeal. In the plastic bag. Rosa's Nokia phone with 43 minutes remaining. The jar of chimichurri, nearly empty. The mole poblano recipe folded into a square the size of a playing card. $940 in cash, which Rosa had delivered across 3 visits, tucked inside bread loaves and folded into the wax paper around sourdough slices, and 1 item I had taken from the facility kitchen during my last midnight visit. A chef's knife. 8 inches. German steel. Dull from neglect and institutional misuse, but balanced. I did not take it as a weapon. I took it because a chef without a knife is a sentence without a verb. The gravel was loud under my shoes. Every step sounded like a shout. I crossed the service lot in 30 seconds, passed the dumpsters, and reached the tree line where the facility's manicured property surrendered to actual Wisconsin. The moon was half full. Enough light to see the Wayne County road that Rosa had described. Turn left. Walk 1.3 miles to the intersection with Highway 42. A gas station on the northeast corner. Rosa would be there at 2:15. I walked. The air was cold, low 40s, and smelled of thawing earth and pine. My breath came in white bursts. My legs felt uncertain. 7 weeks of garden walks at supervised pace had not prepared them for urgency. But my hands were steady. I kept my right hand inside the plastic bag, fingers resting against the knife handle. Not for protection, but for identity. I was a chef walking through the dark. That was enough. Rosa's car was a 2009 Honda Civic, the color of dust, parked at the far end of the gas station lot with its headlights off. She flashed the interior light twice when she saw me. I climbed into the passenger seat. The car smelled of coffee and cumin and the faint sweetness of pan dulce. On the dashboard, a paper map of Wisconsin and Michigan was unfolded, with a route traced in red marker. No GPS, Rosa said. Blake has people who can check things. We stay off the grid. She handed me a thermos of black coffee and a foil-wrapped burrito. Bean and cheese. Her mother's recipe. I ate it in 4 bites and nearly wept at the taste of actual cumin. Rosa drove north. She explained the plan in the same efficient kitchen shorthand she had always used. Door County, Wisconsin. The peninsula that juts into Lake Michigan like a thumb. 300 miles north of Chicago. 900 miles from the life my daughter had stolen. Rosa's cousin, Maria Elena, managed a small motel in Fish Creek called the Birchwood. 12 rooms. Off-season rate. $21.8 a night. Cash only. No ID required because Maria Elena owed Rosa a debt that went back 15 years to a night in Guadalajara that Rosa refused to explain. You will be safe there, Rosa said. Nobody looks for anyone in Door County in April. We drove through the night. Rosa talked to keep me awake. Or maybe to keep herself awake. She told me about her mother's kitchen in Puebla. A room with a concrete floor and a wood-fired stove where 12 people ate every Sunday. She told me about crossing the border at 19, working 3 years of dish pit shifts in Texas before moving to Chicago. She told me about the first time she walked into Calloway's River North for her interview, how the stainless steel and the roar of the exhaust hoods and the organized violence of a professional kitchen made her feel, for the first time in America, that she was somewhere she understood. You said, "Again to me," she said. Eyes on the road. Every other chef I had worked for would have said, "You're done." You said, "Again." That word changed my life. I watched the highway lines disappear under the car. The fields on either side were dark and flat, broken occasionally by a farmhouse light or the silhouette of a grain silo. I thought about the word again. I thought about how many times Diane had said it to me. Again, Martin, taste the sauce. Again, Martin, check the seasoning. Again, Martin, try to be present. She had been teaching me something that went beyond cooking, and I had not understood it until she was gone. At 6:12 in the morning, Rosa pulled into the gravel lot of the Birchwood Motel. Lake Michigan was visible through the birch trees, gray and enormous under a pink dawn sky. The air smelled of cold water and cedar. Maria Elena, a small woman with Rosa's same direct eyes, handed me a room key attached to a wooden tag shaped like a fish. Room 7. She asked no questions. I stood in the doorway of that small room, 12 feet by 14, with its pine-paneled walls and its window facing the lake, and I breathed. The air was clean. No lavender oil. No eucalyptus diffuser. No schedule laminated and slipped under the door. Just cold Wisconsin air and the sound of water touching shore. Rosa stood beside her car in the lot, watching me. She raised one hand. Not a wave. An acknowledgement. a sous chef confirming the station was set. The mise en place was ready. Service was about to begin. I raised my hand back. 900 miles from Chicago. 300 miles from Emerald Meadows. Standing in a doorway in Door County with a dull knife, a recipe for mole poblano, and 43 minutes of prepaid phone time. It was not much, but it was mine. The first 3 days in Door County, I did nothing but sleep and stare at the lake. Room 7 at the Birchwood Motel had a single window that framed Lake Michigan like a painting that changed every hour. Gray at dawn. Silver by mid-morning. Blue so deep by afternoon that it looked like the sky had fallen and forgotten how to get back up. I lay on the narrow bed with its thin quilt and watched the water, and let my body remember what it felt like to exist without a schedule laminated on a card. I slept 14 hours the first day, 11 the second, 9 the third. Each morning I woke disoriented, reaching for a nightstand that was not the one at Emerald Meadows, not the one in Lincoln Park, not the one I had shared with Diane for 31 years. The pine walls smelled of wood and old varnish. The heater clicked and hummed. Outside, the birch trees moved in the April wind like slow metronomes. On the fourth morning, I walked to the small kitchen at the back of the motel. Maria Elena used it to prepare breakfast for guests during the summer season, but in April the motel was nearly empty. Just me and an elderly couple from Minnesota in room 3 who were waiting for the cherry blossoms. The kitchen was modest. A 6-burner gas range. Older model. 1 burner, slightly crooked. A reach-in refrigerator. A chest freezer. Open shelving, with mismatched plates and cups. A wooden cutting board scarred with years of knife marks. It was not a professional kitchen. It was better. It was real. Maria Elena found me standing at the stove at 6 in the morning, holding my dull German knife and an onion I had taken from a mesh bag on the bottom shelf. She leaned against the doorframe with her coffee and watched me cut. I diced that onion slowly. My hands were uncertain. The calluses were still gone, and the blade was still dull, and my grip felt loose, like a musician returning to an instrument after a long illness. The first cuts were uneven, jagged, embarrassing. I would have sent any cook on my line home for cuts that sloppy, but the sound was right. The tap of steel on wood, the faint crunch of onion cell walls separating, the rhythm that had organized my entire adult life, the steady one through of a knife moving through produce, was still inside me, buried under 7 weeks of lavender and boiled chicken, but alive. Maria Elena said nothing. She sipped her coffee. When I finished the onion, she reached into the refrigerator and set a whole chicken on the counter. "The guests in room 3 like soup," she said, and walked away. I made stock that morning. It is the most fundamental thing a chef can do. You take bones and scraps and water and time, and you transform them into something that holds flavor, that gives body to everything it touches. Diane used to say that stock was a metaphor for marriage. You put in what seems like nothing, and if you are patient, you get everything. I roasted the chicken bones at 425 for 40 minutes until they turned the color of dark caramel. I sweated the onion with 2 stalks of celery and a carrot in a thin film of the only oil Maria Elena had, a bottle of vegetable oil that smelled faintly of the plastic cap. I added cold water. I found a single bay leaf in a spice drawer that had not been opened since the previous summer. I set the pot on the crooked burner and let it simmer. For 4 hours I stood in that kitchen and watched the stock. I skimmed the foam every 20 minutes. I adjusted the flame so the surface barely trembled, the way Diane taught me when we were 26 and broke and cooking in a rented kitchen in Wicker Park. "A stock should whisper," she said. "Never shout." The elderly couple from room 3, Ed and Margaret, ate 2 bowls each that evening. Margaret said it was the best soup she had tasted since her mother died. Ed said nothing. He just ate. Slowly, with his eyes half closed, the way people eat, when food reaches something that words cannot. On the 5th day, I used $19 of my remaining cash to buy garlic, butter, dried pasta, canned tomatoes, and a small bag of flour from the general store in Fish Creek. The owner, a broad-hudgered man named Gerald, asked if I was a seasonal worker. I told him I was a cook passing through. He nodded and did not ask anything else, which is one of the things I would learn to love about Door County. People there treated privacy the way good cooks treated salt. They used it carefully and never apologized for it. By the end of the first week, I was cooking 3 meals a day in Maria Elena's kitchen. Breakfast for the motel guests, whoever happened to be there. Lunch for Maria Elena and her teenage son, who ate like a construction crew. Dinner for myself, alone at the small table by the window, watching the lake turn from blue to black, while I ate pasta with garlic and butter and thought about everything I had lost and everything I might still find. Maria Elena refused payment. I insisted. We compromised. I would cook, in exchange for room and board, an arrangement as old as hospitality itself. She gave me a spare key to the kitchen and said, "The stove is yours, before 6 and after 8. Don't burn my motel down." She smiled when she said it, but I understood the seriousness beneath the joke. She was giving me access to the one thing that could bring me back to life. On the 9th day, a Thursday afternoon, I was making bread when a man walked into the kitchen through the back screen door. He was perhaps 45, Vietnamese, with short black hair and greasy, stained hands that suggested he worked with engines or metal. He wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up and carried a paper bag from the Fish Creek General Store. He stopped when he saw me. He looked at the bread dough on the counter, the flour on my arms, the German knife resting on the cutting board. He inhaled deeply through his nose. "You are the one making the soup," he said. It was not a question. "I am," I said. He set his grocery bag on the counter and extended his hand. "Tom Wynn. I own the boat repair shop at the end of the dock. My wife Lynn sent me to find out who has been making our entire street smell like her grandmother's kitchen." His handshake was firm and calloused. The hands of a man who built things. I did not know it then. But Tom Wynn would become the second person to save my life. Tom Wynn ate 3 bowls of my chicken stock that first afternoon and said nothing for a long time. Then he set down the spoon, looked at me across Maria Elena's kitchen table and said, "You are not a cook passing through." I told him he was right. I told him I was a chef who had lost his restaurants, his wife, and most of his dignity, in approximately that order. I did not tell him about Emerald Meadows or Vanessa or Blake, not yet. Some stories need to simmer before they are ready to serve. Tom nodded the way men nod when they recognize damage they have seen before. He told me about his family. His parents had owned a pho restaurant in Garden Grove, California, for 22 years. His father, Bao, had carried the recipe from Saigon in 1979, written in pencil on the back of a photograph of a woman Tom never met. His mother, Ha, had worked the front counter 6 days a week until her knees gave out. The restaurant closed in 2011, not because the food declined, but because a new landlord tripled the rent and Bao refused to cut corners on the broth. "My father boiled bones for 18 hours, Tom said. The landlord wanted him to do it in 6. My father said a man who rushes his stock will rush his life. Tom had not followed his parents into the kitchen. He became a marine mechanic, moved to Door County in 2015 with his wife Lynn and their daughter, and opened a boat repair shop at the end of the Fish Creek Municipal Dock. But food ran in his blood the way it ran in mine. Lynn still cooked Ha's pho every Sunday for the family, and their 8-year-old daughter, who they had named Diane after a character in a book Lynn loved, stood on a step stool and handed her mother star anise and cinnamon bark the way surgical nurses hand instruments to a doctor. When Tom told me his daughter's name, I set down my coffee cup and stared at the lake through the window for a full minute. He did not ask why. Another thing I learned about Tom Wynn. He understood that silence between two people could hold more weight than any sentence. Over the next 3 weeks, Tom became a daily presence. He arrived at the motel kitchen each evening after closing the repair shop, hands smelling of diesel and marine grease, and sat on the stool near the reach-in refrigerator while I cooked. We talked about food, about technique, about the space between what a recipe says and what a dish actually needs, that invisible gap where instinct lives. Tom had never been formally trained, but he had spent 22 years watching his father build flavor from bones and patience, and that education was worth more than any culinary degree I had ever seen. It was Tom who proposed the idea. A Wednesday evening in mid-May, the light over the lake lasting until almost 8:30. The kitchen warm with the steam from a pot of minestrone. The tourist season starts in 3 weeks, he said. 12,000 people come through Fish Creek every weekend. They eat fried fish and ice cream and leave. Nobody here is making real food. He paused. What if we gave them something they could not forget? The plan was simple in the way that good dishes are simple. Strong foundation. Few ingredients. Perfect execution. Tom owned a small waterfront building adjacent to his repair shop, originally a bait drum tackle store that had closed in 2018. 600 square feet. A back room that could be converted into a kitchen. A front room with enough space for 8 tables. A deck overlooking the harbor where, on clear evenings, you could see the sun set behind the peninsula, like a coal sinking into water. We would call it Saigon Bay. The menu would be a conversation between two traditions, Vietnamese and American. Pho made with Bao Nguyen's 18-hour broth, served alongside bread, baked in the French style I had learned 30 years ago. Banh mi with smoked whitefish from Lake Michigan. Summer rolls with Door County cherry vinaigrette. Chicken pot pie, Diane's recipe, with lemongrass and fish sauce folded into the filling. A dish that belonged to no country and every kitchen. I told Tom I had no money. He said he did not need my money. He needed my hands. We shook on it across the kitchen table, his calloused palm against mine. And for the first time since Diane died, I felt the particular electricity of building something that did not yet exist. Lin Wen became the third essential person. She was quiet where Tom was direct, precise where Tom was instinctive. And she carried her mother Rinjalaw's recipes in a binder, so worn that the plastic sleeves had turned cloudy. She arrived at the building the following Saturday with a bucket of paint, a measuring tape, and a list of health code requirements she had downloaded at the Fish Creek Library. We spent 3 weekends gutting the interior. Tom handled the structural work, walls and plumbing, and the gas line for the 6-burner range we found at a restaurant supply auction in Green Bay for $1,100. Lynn managed permits, inspections, and the menu costing spreadsheet she built on a borrowed laptop. I designed the kitchen, 600 square feet. Every inch mattered. I drew the layout on butcher paper, taped to the wall, the same way I had designed the River North kitchen in 1996. Prep station left. Stove and oven center. Plating right. Dish pit in the back corner. Walk-in cooler. A used unit Tom found through a fishing contact against the north wall. The flow had to be circular. No dead ends, no crossed paths. Because a kitchen that forces cooks to collide is a kitchen that breaks people. Little Diane helped. She was 8 years old and serious in the way that children are serious when they understand they are being trusted with something important. She handed me nails. She held the measuring tape. She tastio-tested the cherry vinaigrette and declared it too sour, which it was. And I adjusted the sugar ratio based on the palate of a child who had been raised on pho and knew, without being taught, that balance was everything. By the first week of June, the building had a kitchen, 8 tables, a hand-painted sign that Lynn's college friend had designed, and a deck with a view that no restaurant in Chicago could match. Tom stood on the deck that evening and looked out at the harbor and said, "My father would have liked this place." I stood beside him and thought the same thing about Diane. Saigon Bay opened on the second Saturday of June 2022, and by the 3rd week of July, we had a 45-minute wait on Friday nights. I will not pretend the beginning was smooth. The first service was a disaster of the kind that only a 600-square-foot kitchen with 2 cooks and no dishwasher can produce. Tom burned the banh mi bread twice. I oversalted the pho because my hands were shaking, the kind of shaking that has nothing to do with age and everything to do with the terror of caring again. Lynn ran front of house, 8 tables, alone, and by 9 o'clock, her voice was hoarse and her sneakers were soaked through with spilled broth. Little Diane fell asleep in a booth at 8:15 with a crayon in her hand and a half-finished drawing of a boat. But the food was good. Not perfect. Good. And in a town where the dining options were fried perch and soft-serve ice cream, good was a revelation. Word spread the way it always does in small communities, not through advertising but through the simple, ancient machinery of one person telling another person that something unexpected had happened. There's a place on the dock, Vietnamese American. The old guy makes bread that will change your life. By August, Tom quit the repair shop on weekends to cook full-time Friday through Sunday. Lynn hired a high school girl named Abby to bus tables. I developed a rhythm I had not felt since the early years of Calloway's, that state of flow where your hands know the next task before your brain does, where the kitchen becomes a single organism with multiple limbs and one pulse. The menu tightened. The pho found its depth. The cherry vinaigrette balanced. The chicken pot pie, Diane's recipe fused with lemongrass and fish sauce, became the signature dish. The one people drove 45 minutes from Sturgeon Bay to eat. I was rebuilding. Bone by bone, the way you rebuild a stock from scraps. Rosa called every Sunday evening on the Nokia phone. She had moved to a new apartment in Pilsen, smaller but cheaper, and had picked up a 4th job. Prep cook at a Mexican restaurant in Humboldt Park, where the owner asked no questions and paid in cash. She reported what she could gather about Blake and Vanessa. The Harrison Calloway Group had rebranded all 3 original locations. River North was now a fast casual concept called CW Kitchen. West Loop operated 6 ghost kitchen brands. Lincoln Park had been demolished in May. Rosa drove past the site and described an empty lot surrounded by chain link fence. The ground still scarred with the foundation lines of the building where Diane and I had opened our first restaurant 28 years ago. I listened to that description, holding the phone against my ear in the dark, standing on the Saigon Bay deck with the lake black and silent in front of me, and I let the anger move through me the way heat moves through cast iron. Slowly. Completely. I did not fight it. I let it season me. In October 2023, 18 months after my escape, a letter arrived at the Birchwood Motel addressed to Martin Calloway. No return address. The envelope was heavy, cream-colored, the kind used by law firms. Maria Elena brought it to the kitchen during breakfast service and set it beside the cutting board without a word. Inside was a letter from an attorney named Patricia Whitfield. The letterhead read Whitfield and Kavanaugh, Estate and Trust Law, 120 North LaSalle Street, Chicago. The letter was 3 pages, typed, single-spaced, and it began with a sentence that stopped my knife, mid-stroke. Dear Mr. Calloway, I am writing to inform you of the existence of a trust established by your late wife, Diane Elizabeth Calloway. On the 14th of February 2019, 17 days before her passing, Diane had created a trust. In secret. Without telling me. I read the letter 3 times, standing at the stove with the burner still lit beneath a pot of stock that I forgot to stir for the first time in 35 years. Patricia Whitfield explained the details with the precision of someone who had been waiting a long time to deliver them. In January 2019, 2 months before the accident on Lakeshore Drive, Diane had visited Patricia's office alone. She brought documents, property records, and a handwritten letter sealed in a second envelope that Patricia was instructed to deliver only to me, personally, and only if certain conditions were met. The conditions were 1. That I was alive. 2. That I was no longer residing at any address associated with Vanessa Harrison or Blake Harrison. 3. That at least 12 months had passed since Diane's death. The trust held 3 properties. The original Lincoln Park building, which Diane had purchased in her maiden name, Diane Elizabeth Renault, in 1993, 1 year before we married. The West Loop building, acquired through a separate LLC called Renault Holdings in 2004. And the River North building, purchased in 2010 under the same entity. All 3 properties had been leased to Calloway's LLC, but the ownership had never transferred. Blake had sold the Lincoln Park building for demolition, without knowing that the land beneath it belonged to a dead woman's trust. The sale was void. The demolition was unauthorized. The total assessed value of the 3 properties, according to Patricia's letter, was $6.3 million. Diane had seen something I had not. Or perhaps she had seen someone. The letter did not say whether Diane suspected Vanessa specifically, but the structure of the trust, the conditions, the secrecy, suggested a woman who understood that love and danger could live in the same house. The sealed envelope inside the legal package contained a single handwritten page. Diane's handwriting, the looping cursive she used for grocery lists, birthday cards, and the notes she left on my pillow when she went to bed before me. Martin, if you are reading this, then the thing I feared has happened, and the thing I hoped has also happened. You got out. I am sorry I could not tell you. I am sorry for the secrets, but some recipes must be prepared in silence, or they lose their power. The buildings are yours. They have always been yours. Do not let anger be the main ingredient. It makes everything bitter. Start again. I know you can. You taught me that word. Again. Love, Diane. I sat on the kitchen floor of Saigon Bay, with the letter in my flour-dusted hands, and read it 4 more times. Little Diane Nguyen found me there 20 minutes later. She sat beside me on the tile, her small shoulder touching my arm, and said, "Are you sad, Mr. Martin?" I said, "I am a lot of things right now." She thought about this for a moment. My mom says, you can be a lot of things at the same time. Like soup, like soup. Like stock made from bones and scraps and time and patience. Like a life that falls apart and then, if you are lucky and stubborn and surrounded by people who refuse to let you disappear, comes back together as something nourishing and warm. I called Rosa that night and told her everything. She was silent for 11 seconds. Then she said, "Chef, it is time to cook. A good stock takes 18 hours. A good plan takes longer." I flew to Chicago on a Tuesday morning in late November 2023. The first time I had left Door County in 19 months. Tom drove me to the Green Bay airport at 4 in the morning, and neither of us spoke for the first 30 minutes. He understood. Some journeys require silence the way some dishes require rest. Patricia Whitfield's office occupied the 14th floor of a limestone building on North LaSalle Street, the kind of address that smells of old money and fresh paper. She was 67, silver one-haired, with reading glasses that hung from a beaded chain and a handshake that communicated 39 years of courtroom experience in a single grip. Her partner, James Kavanaugh, sat at the far end of the conference table, a stack of folders arranged in front of him with the precision of a mise en place. Patricia wasted no time. She laid out the legal architecture that Diane had constructed, and as she spoke, I understood for the first time that my wife had been not only the best person I had ever known but also the most strategic. Diane created Renault Holdings LLC in 2003, using her maiden name and a separate tax identification number. She purchased the West Loop and River North properties through this entity over the following 7 years, funding the acquisitions with income from a freelance interior design business she had operated quietly since the late 90s. I had known about the design work. I had not known about the scale. Diane had earned, saved, and invested nearly $2 million without ever mentioning a number. The properties appreciated. By 2019, the 3 buildings were assessed at $4.1 million. Current market value, Patricia confirmed, was $6.3 million. The trust itself was airtight. Diane had named Patricia as sole trustee, with instructions to locate me if I ever separated from Vanessa and Blake by a distance of more than 200 miles for a period exceeding 12 months. The distance clause was specific. Diane knew that if I left, I would leave far. She knew me better than I knew myself, which is the kind of realization that breaks your heart and heals it at the same time. James Kavanaugh handled the forensic side. He opened his folders one by one, and walked me through what Blake Harrison had done. The Harrison Calloway Group had generated $4.2 million in revenue over 20 months. Of that amount, approximately $1.9 million had been diverted into personal accounts belonging to Blake and Vanessa. The diversions were structured as consulting fees, management bonuses, and vendor payments to shell companies that existed only on paper. Blake had also taken a $700,000 loan against the River North property, listing himself as the authorized representative of the owner. The loan documents contained my forged signature, 3 separate instances: forgery, fraud, embezzlement, elder financial abuse. James laid each charge on the table, the way a butcher lays cuts on a board. Clean and without sentiment. "We can file civil claims immediately," Patricia said. "The property sales are void. The loan is fraudulent. Renault Holdings has clear title, and you are the sole beneficiary of the trust." She paused and removed her glasses. "But I want to recommend something else, Martin. I want to recommend the FBI." The word landed in the room like a cleaver on a cutting board, Patricia explained. The scale of Blake's financial fraud, combined with the forged signatures and the interstate movement of funds, qualified for federal investigation. She had a contact at the Chicago field office, a senior agent named Catherine Park, who specialized in elder financial exploitation. If I agreed, Patricia would refer the case. The FBI would investigate quietly, build the case over several months, and execute arrests at a moment of maximum impact. Maximum impact, I repeated. Patricia allowed herself a small smile. "I have been Diane's attorney for 24 years, Martin. She did not build this structure for you to win quietly. I spent 3 days in Chicago. I did not visit the old neighborhoods. I did not drive past the empty lot where Lincoln Park used to stand. I stayed in Patricia's conference room and reviewed every document, every forged signature, every bank statement. James showed me photographs of Blake's new apartment in the Gold Coast, a two-unit purchased 7 months after I was sent to Emerald Meadows. He showed me Vanessa's Instagram account, which I had never seen, filled with photos of restaurant openings, designer clothing, and a vacation in the Maldives captioned, "Building Dad's Legacy, one sunset at a time." I stared at that caption for a long time. Then I closed the laptop and said, "Call Agent Park." Rosa arrived in Chicago on Thursday. She met me at Patricia's office with a folder of her own. Bank statements from her time as head cook at Calloway's. Payroll records showing her abrupt termination, and a handwritten timeline of every suspicious conversation she had overheard between Blake and Nicole Torres. Rosa had been building her own case. Quietly, methodically, on the back of napkins and the margins of grocery lists. For 18 months, she spread her evidence across the conference table, and James Kavanaugh looked at it for a full minute before saying, "This is exceptional work, Miss Gutierrez." Rosa looked at me. "I am a line cook, chef. We do not waste ingredients." The plan took shape over the following 14 months. Agent Park opened a formal investigation in January 2024. Rosa, at her own insistence, returned to Chicago full-time and took a position at a restaurant 2 blocks from the West Loop Ghost Kitchen. She observed. She documented. She reported to Agent Park every 2 weeks. Patricia's team filed preliminary injunctions to freeze the fraudulent property transactions without alerting Blake's attorneys. James traced the shell companies to a single registered agent in Delaware who, under federal subpoena, provided records connecting every payment back to Blake Harrison's personal accounts. I returned to Door County and cooked. I made stock. I made bread. I served pho and chicken pot pie and cherry vinaigrette to tourists who had no idea that the quiet man behind the stove was preparing something far more complex than dinner. Every Sunday evening I called Rosa. Every Monday morning I called Patricia. The plan simmered the way Bowwin's broth simmered. Low and slow, 18 hours. No shortcuts. No rushing. By January 2025, the case was ready. Agent Park had assembled evidence sufficient for 12 federal charges. Patricia had prepared civil filings that would reclaim all three properties and demand full restitution. Rosa had documented 14 months of operational activity. The trap was set. All we needed was the right moment to serve. And then Blake Harrison gave us one. An invitation, printed on cream cardstock with gold embossing, arrived at Patricia's office in late January. The Harrison Calloway Group cordially invited guests to a Valentine's Day grand reopening celebration at the River North location. February 14th. 200 guests. Press coverage. A red carpet. I held the invitation in my hands and thought of Diane. February 14th. The same day she had signed the trust. She could not have known, but it felt like she did. Valentine's Day. I said to Patricia over the phone, Valentine's Day. She confirmed. The stock was ready. It was time to plate. February 14th, 2025. Valentine's Day. The same date Diane signed the trust that would undo everything her daughter had built on lies. I arrived in Chicago the night before and stayed at a hotel on Michigan Avenue that Patricia had booked under her firm's name. I did not sleep. I sat in the dark room on the 12th floor and watched the city lights reflected on the frozen surface of the river below, and thought about the last time I had been in this city as a free man. 3 years ago, a different person wearing the same skin. Rosa called at 6 in the morning. She had been awake since 4, she said, ironing a black dress she had bought at a thrift store on 18th Street. She would attend the grand reopening as a guest. Patricia had arranged the invitation through a food journalist contact who owed her a favor. Rosa's job was simple. Be inside the building when the doors opened at 7 o'clock. Watch. Document. And when the moment came, open the service entrance on the south side of the building to let Agent Park's team through. How do you feel? I asked. Like the last ticket on a Saturday night, chef. Focused. Patricia picked me up at 9 in the morning. We drove to her office on North LaSalle, where James Kavanaugh had spread the final documents across the conference table, like a general reviewing a battlefield map. The civil complaint, the emergency injunction, the property reclamation filing, 3 CSON desist letters, 1 addressed to Blake Harrison, 1 to Vanessa Harrison, and 1 to Nicole Torres. Each letter detailed specific violations, specific amounts, specific dates. Each one ended with the same sentence. You are hereby notified that all properties operated under the Harrison Calloway Group are owned by Renault Holdings LLC, of which Martin Edward Calloway is the sole beneficiary. I signed each document with a hand that did not shake. I noticed that, after 3 years of trembling, of uncertainty, of watching my own fingers forget how to hold a knife properly, my hand was steady. The calluses had returned. Not from cooking in a 3-star kitchen, but from kneading bread dough and gripping cast iron handles in a 600-square-foot restaurant on a dock in Door County. Different calluses. Same purpose. But they meant I was still working. Still building. Still a chef. At 4 in the afternoon, Agent Catherine Park arrived at Patricia's office. She was 43. Compact. With short black hair and the kind of posture that suggested she had never once leaned against a wall in her life. She carried a leather briefcase and wore no jewelry except a thin watch. She sat down, opened the briefcase, and laid out the operational plan with the economy of someone who had done this many times and found no pleasure in it. The FBI team would consist of 8 agents. 4 would enter through the front entrance of the River North location at approximately 8:15. During the cocktail hour, when the room would be full and the press cameras would be rolling. 2 would enter through the service entrance, guided by Rosa. 2 would remain outside to secure the perimeter. The arrest warrants had been signed by a federal judge that morning. There were 3 warrants: Blake Harrison, Nicole Torres, Dr. Lauren Simmons of Emerald Meadows, who had been charged separately with conspiracy to commit elder abuse and falsification of medical records. We will wait for the toast, Agent Park said. Mr. Harrison has announced a public toast at 8 o'clock. We want the room full. We want the cameras pointed at him. She looked at me. Mr. Calloway, you will not be present inside the building during the arrest. For legal and safety reasons, you will remain here at Miss Whitfield's office. You will receive a phone call when the operation is complete. I understood. I was not the hand that would swing the cleaver. I was the one who had sharpened it. At 5:30, Patricia's office fell quiet. James went home to his family. Agent Park returned to the field office for final briefing. Patricia sat across from me at the conference table with 2 cups of coffee and a silence that felt like the pause between the last prep task and the first ticket of the night. Diane would be proud of you, she said. Diane would be furious with me, I said. For letting it happen in the first place. Patricia shook her head. She anticipated this, Martin. Every clause in that trust was designed for exactly this scenario. She was not angry at you. She was protecting you. There is a difference. At 6:45, Rosa sent a text message from the Nokia, which I had given her for the evening. 2 words. I'm in. At 7 o'clock, the Harrison Calloway Group Grand Reopening Valentine's Gala officially began. 200 guests. A red carpet. Local press. Chicago food bloggers. A 12-piece jazz band. A menu designed by a consulting chef who had never met me. Featuring dishes that carried echoes of recipes I had spent decades perfecting. Stripped of their soul and served on square plates with foam and microgreens. Blake Harrison stood at the entrance in a custom Navy suit, shaking hands and smiling the smile of a man who believed he had won. Vanessa was beside him. Rosa described her later. A red dress. Diamond earrings. I did not recognize. Her hair styled differently. Shorter. More severe. She greeted guests with the practiced warmth of someone who had studied hospitality from the outside. Who understood its gestures but not its heart. Rosa said that Vanessa's hands were restless the entire evening, adjusting her earrings, touching her necklace, smoothing the tablecloths. Nervous hands. The hands of a person standing on ground she did not own. At 7:58, Blake stepped onto a small stage near the bar. He tapped a microphone. The room quieted. He raised a glass of champagne and began his toast. 3 years ago, we inherited a legacy. Tonight, we celebrate what that legacy has become. Rosa was standing near the service entrance, her hand on the door handle. Agent Park's team was already in position on the south sidewalk. The press cameras swiveled toward the stage. 200 glasses rose. And at that exact moment, a courier walked through the front door carrying 3 envelopes. The courier was a young man in a black jacket, no older than 25, hired by Patricia's firm for this single task. He carried the 3 envelopes in a clear plastic folder, each one labeled with a name in Patricia's precise handwriting. He walked through the crowd with the calm of someone who had no idea what he was delivering, and handed the first envelope directly to Blake Harrison on the stage. Blake stopped mid-sentence. His champagne glass was still raised. 200 faces watched him look down at the envelope, read his name, and tear it open with one hand while holding the microphone in the other. The room was silent except for the jazz band's pianist, who played 3 more notes before realizing something had changed and lifted his fingers from the keys. Rosa told me later that Blake's face moved through 4 expressions in 6 seconds. Confusion, recognition, disbelief, and then a 5th expression that Rosa had never seen on a human face before. The look of a man who understands, in a single moment, that the floor beneath him belongs to someone else. The ceasioundeticist letter was 3 pages. Blake read only the first paragraph before the envelope slipped from his hand and landed on the stage floor. The courier had already moved through the crowd. He handed the second envelope to Nicole Torres, who was standing near the bar in a green dress, holding a martini. She opened it, read 2 lines, and set her glass down so quickly that it tipped and shattered on the marble floor. The sound cut through the room like a plate breaking during service. That sharp, unmistakable crack that makes every head turn. The third envelope reached Vanessa. She was seated at the head table, between a food blogger and a local television producer. The courier placed the envelope on the table in front of her. She picked it up, turned it over, and saw her name. Rosa watched from 12 feet away. She said Vanessa's fingers trembled as she opened it. She said Vanessa read the entire first page without blinking. She said that when Vanessa reached the sentence, "All properties operated under the Harrison Calloway Group are owned by Renault Holdings LLC, of which Martin Edward Calloway is the sole beneficiary." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out, like a fish pulled from water, like a woman drowning on dry land. Then Rosa opened the service door. Agent Park entered first. She walked through the kitchen, past the line cooks who froze at the sight of her badge, through the swinging doors, and into the dining room. 7 agents followed, 4 from the front entrance, 2 from the service door behind Park, 1 from the east fire exit. They moved with choreographed efficiency, the kind of coordination that only repetition and authority can produce. The room erupted. Guests stood. Chairs scraped. The jazz band abandoned their instruments. Camera phones rose like a field of electric flowers. Agent Park approached the stage. "Blake Allen Harrison, you are under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, forgery, and elder financial exploitation. You have the right to remain silent." Blake did not move. He stood on the stage, with the microphone still in his hand, his champagne glass now on the floor beside the envelope, and he looked out at the room with the expression of a man watching his own building collapse from inside it. 2 agents flanked him. One removed the microphone. The other placed handcuffs on his wrists behind his back. The click of the cuffs was audible in the silence. Rosa said it sounded like a lock engaging on a walk-in cooler door. Final, metallic, cold. Nicole Torres was arrested near the bar. She did not resist. She lowered her head and said nothing as the agents guided her through the crowd. Her martini was still dripping off the edge of the bar, a thin stream of gin and vermouth pooling on the marble like something expensive being wasted. Dr. Lauren Simmons was not present at the gala. She was arrested the same evening at her home in Kenosha, Wisconsin, at 8:22, 7 minutes after Blake's arrest. The charges: conspiracy to commit elder abuse, falsification of medical records, unlawful confinement. Emerald Meadows would be shut down by state order within 60 days. Vanessa was not arrested. This was deliberate. Patricia, Agent Park, and I had discussed it at length. Vanessa was complicit, but her role was more complex. She had signed documents, yes. She had participated, yes. But the evidence suggested that Blake had been the architect and Nicole the enabler. Vanessa occupied a gray zone between accomplice and instrument, a daughter who had been manipulated by her husband into betraying her father, or a daughter who had chosen her husband over her father. The distinction mattered legally. It mattered more to me personally. Vanessa sat at the head table through the entire arrest. She did not stand. She did not scream. She did not reach for Blake as they led him past her. She sat with the cease unidicus letter flat on the table in front of her, both palms pressed against the paper, and she stared at a point somewhere beyond the room, beyond the building, beyond anything that the 200 guests, or the press cameras, or the FBI agents could see. Rosa said it was the quietest violence she had ever witnessed. A person collapsing inward, like a souffle removed from the oven too soon. At 8:31, Patricia's phone rang. She answered, listened for 12 seconds, and hung up. She looked at me across the conference table on North LaSalle Street, 14 floors above the city where my daughter had just watched her empire dissolve, and said, "It's done." I stood up. I walked to the window. The city was lit below me. Millions of lights in millions of windows. And somewhere among them was a building that my wife had bought with money she earned in secret, that my daughter had stolen with signatures she forged in silence, and that now belonged to me again. The ground beneath Vanessa's feet. The ground Diane had purchased one property at a time, over 7 years, with the patience of a woman making stock. You put in what seems like nothing, and if you are patient, you get everything. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and closed my eyes. I did not feel victory. I did not feel relief. I felt the particular weight of a dish that has been plated perfectly, but will be eaten by no one. A table set for a family that no longer exists. Patricia placed a hand on my shoulder. Go back to your hotel, Martin. Sleep. Tomorrow, we begin the next part. I did not sleep. I sat in the dark hotel room and waited for the 40-second call. The first call came at 11:14 p.m. I was sitting in the hotel room on Michigan Avenue, still dressed, shoes still on, watching the city lights shift and blur through the window. The phone that Patricia had given me, a new phone, not the Nokia, which was still with Rosa, lit up on the bedside table. The screen showed a Chicago number I did not recognize. I let it ring. 23 seconds. Then silence. The second call came at 11:19. Same number. I watched the screen glow and fade. The third at 11:24. The fourth at 11:31. From a different number, one I did recognize. Blake Harrison's personal cell. I imagined him in a federal holding facility, his one permitted phone call, dialing my number because the only person who could undo what had just happened was the person who had caused it. I let it ring. Calls 5 through 8 arrived in a cluster between 11:40 and midnight, all from Blake's number. Each one rang for exactly 23 seconds, the default before voicemail engaged. He left no messages. A man with nothing to say and no one left to say it to. At 12:07 a.m., the ninth call came. Vanessa's number. I knew it the way. You know the weight of a knife you have held 10,000 times. The digits had not changed since she was 19, and I bought her first cell phone at a store on Michigan Avenue, 6 blocks from where I now sat. She had hugged me in the parking lot and said, "I'll call you every day, Dad." She did. For about 3 years. Then weekly. Then monthly. Then only when she needed something. Calls 9 through 14 came at intervals of 4 to 6 minutes. Vanessa's number, each time. No voicemails. Just the ringing, persistent and unanswered, filling the dark room with a pale blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. I stood up and walked to the window. Below, the Chicago River was a black ribbon edged with gold from the street lamps. A taxi crossed the Michigan Avenue Bridge, its headlights sweeping across the water. Somewhere south of here, in a federal processing center, Blake Harrison was being photographed and fingerprinted. Somewhere on the Gold Coast, Nicole Torres was sitting in a separate facility, her green dress replaced by intake clothing. Somewhere in Kenosha, Dr. Lauren Simmons was learning that her wellness retreat had been sealed by state investigators. And somewhere in this city, in an apartment or a hotel room or the back seat of a car, my daughter was calling me. Call 15 arrived at 12:33. This time she left a voicemail. I did not listen to it. Not yet. Calls 16 through 22 came between 12:40 and 1:15 a.m. I counted each one the way I had counted them in the Door County kitchen 3 years from now in my memory. The scene that had opened this story, the scene that I now understood was not the beginning but the end. Time had folded. The man kneading bread in Fish Creek was the same man sitting in a Chicago hotel room. The 42 calls were not two separate events. They were the same event, experienced from two places at once, the way a recipe exists simultaneously in the past and the present, in the kitchen where it was first made, and in every kitchen where it is made again. Calls 23 through 30 came at shorter intervals, every 2 to 3 minutes. Vanessa's persistence had the rhythm of desperation, the way a cook who has fallen behind on tickets begins to move faster and less accurately, dropping garnishes, forgetting sauces, losing the plot of the meal. She was spiraling. I could feel it through the silence between rings. At 1:48 a.m., call 31 arrived. Then 30A2, 30A3. I sat on the edge of the bed and placed my hands on my knees and breathed. My hands were still, the calluses pressed against the fabric of my trousers. I thought about Edith Langford's words. They take your verbs first. I had taken mine back. Every single one. Call 30U4 came at 2:09. Vanessa's voice appeared in a text message beneath the missed call notification. Dad, please. Blake is gone. Everything is gone. Please answer. Please. I read the message once. I set the phone face down on the bed. Calls 35 through 41 arrived between 2:15 and 2:40. I did not count the seconds anymore. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, and listened to the phone ring and thought about Diane. I thought about the afternoon she taught Vanessa to make chicken pot pie, the two of them in the Lincoln Park kitchen, flour on their arms, Vanessa standing on the step stool, Diane guiding her hands over the dough. I thought about Diane's letter. Do not let anger be the main ingredient. It makes everything bitter. I was not angry. I was something worse. I was a father listening to his daughter drown and choosing, for the first time in her life, not to reach into the water. At 2:47 a.m., the 42nd call arrived. I picked up the phone. I did not answer. I held it and watched the screen pulse with Vanessa's name, the letters glowing in the dark room, and I listened to it ring. 23 seconds. Then the voicemail engaged. This time, she did not speak. The voicemail was 3 minutes and 12 seconds long. I listened to it standing at the window. The phone pressed against my ear. The city silent below. The recording contained no words, only sounds. A burner clicking on. A pan being set on a grate. Butter meeting hot metal. That initial hiss and sizzle that every cook recognizes the way a musician recognizes a tuning fork. Then, chopping. The uneven, unpracticed rhythm of someone who had not held a knife in years. Onion. From the smell I could almost sense through the phone. Garlic. Crushed. Not minced. The way Diane used to do it. Pressing the flat of the blade against the clove and letting the weight do the work. Vanessa was cooking. At 2:47 inches the morning. Alone. In whatever kitchen she had left, my daughter was making her mother's chicken pot pie. She did not say a word for the entire recording. But in the last 4 seconds, beneath the sound of the pot beginning to simmer, I heard her breathe. A single, shaking exhale. The sound a person makes when they are trying to hold themselves together and failing. I lowered the phone. I stood in the dark. The city went on without us. 42 calls. 3 minutes and 12 seconds of silence filled with everything she could not say. I did not call her back. Not that night. Some things need to rest before they can be served. The trials took 5 months. Blake Harrison was sentenced in July 2025. The federal courtroom on South Dearborn Street was half empty, which surprised me. I had expected spectators, press, some version of the audience that had watched him toast his stolen empire 5 months earlier. But courtrooms are not restaurants. People do not line up to watch a man lose everything. They only line up to watch him celebrate. Blake stood before Judge Margaret Chen in a gray suit that did not fit the way his custom navy one had. His attorney, a court-appointed lawyer who replaced the private firm Blake could no longer afford, entered a guilty plea on 9 of 12 federal charges. Wire fraud, bank fraud, 3 counts of forgery, 2 counts of elder financial exploitation, 1 count of conspiracy, 1 count of money laundering. The plea deal eliminated 3 charges in exchange for full cooperation and the return of all misappropriated funds. Judge Chen read the sentence without inflection. 9 years in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, full restitution of $1.9 million, permanent injunction against operating any business involving fiduciary responsibility. I sat in the 3rd row. Rosa sat beside me. Neither of us spoke when the sentence was read. Rosa placed her hand flat on her knee, palm down, the way she steadied herself before plating. I placed mine the same way. 2 cooks, sitting in silence, watching a dish reach the pass for the last time. Blake turned as the marshals led him toward the side door. He looked at me for 3 seconds. I looked back. His eyes held nothing I recognized. Not remorse. Not anger. Not the calculating intelligence that had once convinced me he was worthy of my daughter. Just the hollow stare of a man who had consumed everything around him and found himself empty. Nicole Torres was sentenced in August. 5 years. Conspiracy to commit elder abuse, fraud, falsification of therapeutic records. Her testimony during the plea hearing revealed the full scope of the scheme. Blake had contacted her in September 2021, 2 months before the dinner at which he proposed the business transfer. Nicole was not a licensed grief counselor. She held a bachelor's degree in psychology from an unaccredited online program and had been working as a life coach in the western suburbs. Blake paid her $4,000 per month to construct a narrative of cognitive decline that would justify my removal from the business and eventual placement at Emerald Meadows. The jasmine perfume, the earth-toned clothing, the leather notebook, every detail had been selected to create the appearance of clinical authority. Dr. Lauren Simmons received 3 years. Emerald Meadows was permanently closed by Wisconsin state order in April 2025. 17 former residents filed civil suits. Edith Langford was among them. Her son, the one who had placed her there, was not charged. But Edith told me on the phone that she had changed her will and left the lakefront property to the Milwaukee Public Library. Books never betray you, she said. They only ask to be read. The civil matters resolved in September. Patricia Whitfield's filings reclaimed all 3 properties under Renault Holdings. The unauthorized sale of the Lincoln Park lot was voided, and the real estate firm that had purchased it was compelled to return the land. The fraudulent loan against River North was nullified. James Kavanaugh recovered the remaining misappropriated funds through asset seizure, including Blake's Gold Coast condominium, which was sold at auction for $1.8 million. The total recovery: $6.3 million in property, $1.9 million in restitution, $1.8 million from the condominium sale, $10 million, approximately, returned to a man who had been eating instant oatmeal in a locked facility 3 years earlier. I did not want the money. That is not entirely true. I did not want the money for myself. I wanted it to mean something. Diane's letter had said, "Do not let anger be the main ingredient." She was right. Anger had built Blake's empire. Anger had fueled Nicole's deception. Anger had filled every room at Emerald Meadows, disguised as lavender and wellness. If I used this money for revenge, I would be cooking with the same ingredient that had poisoned my family. In October 2025, Patricia filed the incorporation papers for the Diane Calloway Foundation. The mission: to provide legal advocacy, financial recovery, and transitional housing for elderly victims of family financial exploitation. The seed funding: $3.2 million from the recovered assets. The headquarters: the restored Lincoln Park building, rebuilt on the same foundation where Diane and I had opened our first restaurant 28 years ago. Rosa was named executive director. She resisted for exactly one conversation. I am a line cook, chef, not an executive. I told her that a line cook who had infiltrated a gala, documented 14 months of criminal activity, and organized a federal investigation was whatever she decided to be. She accepted the position and immediately began building a team with the same efficiency she had once used to run a 12E burner station during Saturday service. Tom and Lynn Nguyen continued to operate Saigon Bay in Door County. I remained a partner, returning every other weekend to cook. Little Diane, now 10, had graduated from handing me nails to running the dessert station, where she produced a Door County cherry clafoutis that drew a 4-star review from a Milwaukee food critic who called it astonishingly mature, as though the pastry had been made by someone who understood loss. She was 10. She understood cherries, but perhaps that is the same thing. Vanessa was not charged. The federal prosecutor determined that while she had participated in the scheme, the evidence supported Blake as the primary architect. She was named as an unindicted co-conspirator, a legal designation that carried no prison time but would follow her name through every background check and Google search for the rest of her life. A permanent footnote, a stain shaped like a choice. After the sentencing, Vanessa disappeared from public life. She closed her social media accounts. She vacated the Gold Coast apartment. Rosa heard through a mutual contact that Vanessa had taken a job washing dishes at a small restaurant in Evanston, a suburb north of Chicago. She used her maiden name, Calloway. I thought about that for a long time. My daughter, washing dishes under my name. There was something in it that I could not yet articulate. Something that tasted like the beginning of a stock, bones and water and time. Not yet flavor, but the possibility of it. I did not contact her. Not yet. Some recipes cannot be rushed. Diane had taught me that. Bao Nguyen had taught Tom the same. A stock should whisper. Never shout. But I left the door open. She came on a Sunday, in April 2026. I was in the Saigon Bay kitchen. Alone. Prepping for the evening service that would not start for another 4 hours. The cherry trees along the Fish Creek Harbor were in full bloom, white and pale pink, and the light through the kitchen window had that particular spring quality that makes everything look like it is being remembered even as it happens. I was slicing garlic, 12 cloves, paper thin. The blade, moving in the rhythm that had organized my life for nearly 4 decades. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of a man who had found his way back to himself. The screen door opened behind me. I did not turn around. In a working kitchen, you learn to identify people by their footsteps, the way they displace air, the hesitation or confidence in their approach. These footsteps were slow, uncertain, the footsteps of someone who was not sure they had the right to be in the room. Dad. I set the knife down. I turned around. Vanessa stood in the doorway with a canvas bag over her shoulder and dark circles under her eyes that no amount of sleep could explain. She was thinner than I remembered. Her hair was longer, pulled back in a simple ponytail, no styling, no product. She wore jeans, a white twill shirt, and sneakers that had been washed many times. Her hands were red, dishwasher's hands. The skin cracked at the knuckles, the nails cut short, the palms rough from hot water and industrial soap. I knew those hands. Every chef starts with those hands. She did not move from the doorway. She held the canvas bag against her side, the way a child holds a blanket. Something to grip when the ground feels uncertain. Her eyes moved across the kitchen. The 6-burner range, the scarred cutting board, the hand-painted menu on the wall, the small window facing the harbor, and I watched her take in the life I had built without her. Rosa told me where to find you, she said. I asked her not to warn you. I wanted. She stopped. She pressed her lips together and looked at the floor. I wanted to come without a plan. I have had too many plans. I leaned against the prep counter and waited. A chef learns patience from stock. 18 hours of watching bones release their flavor into water. Never stirring too hard, never raising the heat. You wait. You watch. You let the process teach you what it needs. Vanessa reached into the canvas bag and pulled out 2 objects. The first was a chef's knife. Not new, not expensive. A 10-inch Victorinox, the kind culinary schools issue to first-year students. The blade had been sharpened recently, the edge bright against the overhead light. The handle showed 6 months of use. Small scratches. A faint darkening where her grip had worn into the polymer. I enrolled in culinary school in January, she said. Community college. Night classes. This is the knife they gave me. She set it on the counter beside my German blade. The 2 knives lay parallel, hers new and institutional, mine old and scarred. And the image held something I could not immediately name. 2 timelines, 2 kitchens, 2 versions of the same impulse, which is to feed people and, in feeding them, to say the things that words cannot carry. The second object she removed from the bag was smaller. A recipe card, yellowed at the edges. written in a handwriting I would have recognized in the dark, in my sleep, in any kitchen on earth. Diane's chicken pot pie recipe. The original. The one I had sealed away after her death. The one I believed had been lost when Blake gutted the Lincoln Park house. I took it, Vanessa said. Before Blake sold everything. I went back to the house one night and took it from the kitchen drawer. I have carried it for 3 years. Her voice cracked on the word 3. The same number of years I had been gone. The same number of properties Diane had hidden. The same number of voicemails I had lost when they took my phone at Emerald Meadows. 3. The number that divided our family and, now, might be the number that brought it back. She placed the recipe card on the counter beside the knives. Diane's handwriting looked up at me from the stainless steel surface. The looping cursive. The specific measurements. The note at the bottom in smaller letters that I had forgotten about until this moment. Make with someone you love. It tastes better that way. I looked at my daughter. She looked at me. The kitchen was silent except for the harbor water outside and the hum of the reach-in refrigerator and the particular charged stillness that exists between two people who have caused each other enormous pain and are standing, despite everything, in the same room. I picked up the recipe card. I read it once, slowly. The way you read a letter from someone who is gone. Then I set it on the counter between us and said the only word that mattered. Again, Vanessa's eyes filled. She nodded. She set her bag on the floor, washed her hands at the sink, and tied on an apron that hung from the hook beside the door. I handed her an onion and pointed to the cutting board. She cut the onion. Her technique was imperfect, the slices uneven, the grip too tight, the wrist too stiff. A first-year student's cuts, but the sound was right. The tap of steel on wood. The rhythm that had organized our family long before it fell apart. I did not correct her. I did not say good. In a kitchen, silence is the highest praise. I roasted the chicken. She made the roux, stirring butter and flour over medium heat with the focus of someone who understood that this moment was not about pastry. It was about standing in a kitchen beside a person you have wronged and letting the work speak for you. Diane had known this. Cooking is a language older than apology. It does not require forgiveness. It only requires presence. We built the pot pie together. Layer by layer. Chicken pulled from the bone. Vegetables cut by my daughter's imperfect hand. Roux thickened with stock I had made that morning. From bones, and scraps, and time. The top crust she rolled herself, pressing too hard in places, leaving it too thin in others. But whole. Complete. A surface that held everything beneath it together. I set the oven to 375 degrees. She placed the pot pie inside. 45 minutes. We sat on the kitchen steps facing the harbor and waited. The cherry blossoms drifted across the water like slow white confetti. Little Diane Nguyen appeared from Tom's repair shop and waved. A fishing boat moved through the channel, its engine low and steady. The sun was beginning its long spring descent, turning the lake from blue to gold. Vanessa sat beside me with her red, cracked, dishwasher's hands resting on her knees. She did not speak. She did not need to. She was here, in the kitchen, learning to cook, starting from nothing. The way all good things start. The oven timer rang. I opened the door. Golden crust, 375 degrees. 45 minutes. The smell filled the kitchen and moved through the screen door and out into the April air, where it mixed with the cherry blossoms and the lake water and the sound of a small town going about its evening. Diane's chicken pot pie. Made with someone I love. It tasted better that way. If you are listening to this story, I want you to know something. Loss is not the end of the recipe. It is the first ingredient. What you build from it. The stock, the bread, the table you set for people who show up despite everything. That is the meal. That is the life. My name is Martin Calloway. I am 65 years old. I am a chef. I am a father, and I am still cooking. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe, and leave a comment telling me, what is the one recipe that holds your family together?